My daughter and her husband used my stroke to collect $85,000 in sympathy donations. They called it a fundraiser. I called it fraud. When the state opened an investigation, Claire didn't apologize. She threatened me. "You'll destroy your own family," she warned, but I'm her mother, not her accomplice, and I kept every receipt. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. I was paralyzed on my right side, but I heard every dollar they counted. The house was quiet in the way hospitals sometimes are, soft footsteps, low murmurs, filtered light slanting across the hardwood floors. But Margaret had learned, in the weeks since her stroke, that silence wasn't the same as peace, especially not in her daughter Claire's house. She lay in the adjustable bed set up in the guest room, the one with soft beige walls and a diffuser puffing out lavender mist in the corner. Her right arm rested motionless at her side. She couldn't feel her toes. Her mouth had improved. No more slurred words, but her limbs still betrayed her. And yet her ears? Her ears worked just fine. Outside the half-closed door, she heard voices. "I told you. Use the hospital photo, the one where she's asleep with the IV in," Claire whispered, her voice hushed but urgent. Travis snorted. "That one got us the first 20 grand. We need a stronger caption this time, something about complications, or regression." Margaret's stomach twisted. Her skin went cold beneath the blanket, despite the room's steady warmth. Claire again. "I'll say she's not verbal yet. Emotional update. People like emotional." Footsteps padded away. A chair creaked. Margaret stared at the ceiling, her breath catching at the top of her lungs. They're talking about the fundraiser. They're still running it. She'd been aware of it, vaguely, after the stroke, a murmur of something being shared online. She remembered a nurse mentioning donations. She assumed it was Claire's way of coping. But now it felt different. It felt like business. Later that afternoon, Claire breezed into the room holding a glass of green juice and a tablet under one arm. "Hey, Mom," she cooed. "Good day today? You're looking more alert." Margaret blinked, the only response her body could comfortably manage at the moment. Claire smiled down at her, tight, camera ready. "We just passed 80,000, she said in a sing-song whisper. "Isn't that amazing?" Margaret blinked again. 80. The number floated in her mind like a foreign object. Claire leaned closer. "You're such a fighter, Mom. People are so inspired. We even had a woman from Michigan donate $2,000 after reading your story." There was a pause. Then Claire reached into the drawer and pulled out a bottle of eye drops. "Let's keep you looking fresh," she said, and administered them like she was prepping a model for a photo shoot. "No one wants to donate to someone who looks checked out." Margaret wanted to scream, but she couldn't move, couldn't lift her hand, couldn't sit up and ask why her daughter was turning her stroke into a pitch deck. She lay still, but her mind raced. She hadn't always been this helpless. Just 6 months ago, she was directing operations at the prestigious Bay Ridge Academy, a no-nonsense administrator who knew every student's name and every teacher's weakness. Her retirement party had been catered, decorated, and attended by over 200 people. Margaret in heels, clipboard in hand, smiling wide but already planning her volunteer schedule. Fiercely independent, unapologetically direct. The kind of woman who scheduled her own flu shots and kept a laminated copy of her power of attorney in her purse, just in case. And now, here she was, reduced to a patient, used as a prop. That night, the blue glow of Claire's iPad crept under the door like a secret. Margaret listened again. "Another 500, from someone named Diane," Travis said. "She said she worked with your mom in administration." "Oh, perfect," Claire whispered back. "Tag her in the next update. I'll write something like, 'Mom blinked at me today. I think she's trying to say thank you.' That kind of thing always hits." Margaret's jaw clenched. Her memory was intact. Her thoughts were sharp. And now, every word they spoke was being etched into her mind, like glass scoring glass. She didn't know what she was going to do yet, but she was going to remember everything. The door creaked open the next morning, letting in a shaft of pale light. Claire stepped in, holding her phone. Her voice was honeyed. "Smile, Mom," she said, lifting the camera. "We need a good update photo." Margaret's lips didn't move, but her eyes locked on Claire's, steady and cold. Behind the stillness, something had started to wake up. They took my medical file and turned it into marketing copy. Margaret let her eyes glaze over as Claire re-entered the room, speaking in the saccharine tone she reserved for nurses and followers. "Still tired, huh? That's okay, Mom. You just rest. You're doing so good." Margaret didn't blink, didn't flinch. She kept her breathing slow and shallow, her gaze drifting past Claire's shoulder like her mind was drifting too. It was an act, one she'd perfected over the last few days. If Claire thought her mother's mind was still foggy, she'd keep talking around her, keep slipping. It worked. That afternoon, Claire left her iPad on the end table while she took a call in the backyard. The device chimed once. Margaret's eyes twitched toward it. With her left hand, the only one that obeyed, she reached slowly, trembling with effort. Her thumb hovered over the home button. The screen lit up. No passcode. Claire had left her logged in. Margaret opened the Fundraiser app first. The top post was a photo of her, eyes closed, tubes still taped to her skin. The caption read, "Mom had a tough day. Whispers and twitches but still no words. We're staying strong. Anything helps." She scrolled further. Another image. Margaret in a wheelchair, head tilted, face slack. Claire had added a soft filter to make the light look angelic. She smiled today. First real smile since the stroke. Please help us give her the care she deserves. Margaret's heart pounded. The comments were overflowing. Hearts, prayers, donations. She recognized names. Barbara Lynch gave $1,000. She'd been Margaret's assistant principal for nearly a decade. Marvin Kelsey, $500. A former student's father who once called her the best thing that ever happened to Bay Ridge Academy. Even Diane Reynolds, $2,200 marked as anonymous. But Margaret would know her anywhere. Diane had been her right hand for years. Her chest burned, not with illness, but with rage. These weren't just donors. They were people who trusted her, who believed in her, and Claire had turned that trust into a faucet she could turn on and off at will. Margaret kept scrolling, then she froze. Travis, on a speakerphone call. The iPad was still recording audio from earlier that day. She tapped to play it back. 80 grand and counting, he laughed. We could hit 6 figures by next week if she doesn't, bounce back too fast. Another voice chuckled in the background. Man, that's cold. It's not cold, Travis replied. It's resourceful. She's not going to need all this. She's half there. Margaret's left hand trembled as she tapped the iPad again. She opened the photo app. Screenshots, duplicates, staged photos. She saved everything she could and emailed the files to herself, fingers moving clumsily but deliberately across the touchscreen. Her old email was still active. She'd reactivated it with Diane's help last year during a reunion invite mix-up. She whispered the address to herself, typing slowly, Margaret.Callahan1 at... As the last attachment uploaded, a familiar voice echoed from outside. Claire's. "I'll grab the groceries in a sec," she shouted from the patio. Margaret sent the email. She closed every app, set the iPad down, resumed her blank stare. Claire walked in seconds later, carrying a paper bag. She gave her mother a casual glance and smiled. "You look peaceful today, Mom. We'll post a little update later, okay?" Margaret blinked once, a slow, deliberate yes. The mask stayed on. That night, she stared at the ceiling while the clock on the wall ticked off midnight. She couldn't sleep, not because of her body, but because her mind wouldn't stop sprinting. She whispered one name out loud, just to test the world's response. Diane. The next morning, her phone vibrated on the nightstand. A single text appeared from an unknown number. "Do you know they listed you as co-manager of the campaign?" Diane. "They forged my recovery plan." And a smile. Margaret waited until the timing was right. It was a humid Tuesday afternoon, and Claire was in one of her calmer moods, as she called them, fresh from a yoga class, still flushed, sipping cucumber water like she'd invented wellness. She came into the room humming to herself, checked Margaret's pulse with one hand, and started fluffing the pillows without asking. Margaret, upright in bed and steady enough now to speak without slurring, said clearly, "We need to talk." Claire paused. Her hand froze mid-fluff. "About what?" "The fundraiser." There was a beat. Barely a second, but Margaret saw the flicker of hesitation in Claire's eyes. It was fast, masked by a bright smile that came too quickly. "Oh, that," Claire said breezily. "I told you about it. You said you were fine with it." "I didn't." "You don't remember?" Claire asked gently, the sweetness in her voice now lined with something sharper. "You nodded. I told you what we were doing and you nodded. Maybe it was in the hospital. You might have been groggy." Margaret didn't blink. "Claire, I never gave you permission to use my medical history, or my photos, or my name." Claire stood straighter, arms crossing. "Mom, this is for your benefit. People want to help, and we need the help unless you'd rather move into some underfunded state facility." Margaret stared at her, silent. "I thought you were grateful," Claire added softly, feigning hurt. "I thought you trusted me." "I trusted you not to lie about my recovery," Margaret said. "That trust is gone." Claire didn't answer. She turned and left the room, the door clicking shut behind her like punctuation. That night, after Claire and Travis left to attend some dinner for supporters, Margaret picked up the iPad again. She was moving faster now, still clumsy with her left hand, but deliberate. The coordination was coming back. She opened the fundraiser page, navigated to the admin settings Diane had guided her toward. There it was, her name. Margaret Callahan, campaign co-manager. Her heart thudded. She tapped into the profile details. Attached was a medical release form, signed, dated, uploaded 3 weeks ago, but the signature, her name in elegant script, was one she hadn't written in over a year. She knew exactly where it had come from. An old email chain from before her stroke, an attached permission slip she'd signed for a newsletter article. They'd copied it. She tapped back into her email. The password had been reset last week, likely by Claire, but Diane, true to form, had helped her recover the account through a back door, security questions only someone close would know. Margaret searched for the fundraiser domain in her inbox. 2 alerts popped up. "You have been added as a manager to Healing for Margaret, Stroke Recovery Fund. Your medical release has been uploaded and verified." Both from 2 weeks ago. She clicked the headers and stared. The sender address wasn't hers. It was a Gmail alias. 1 character off from her actual email. A fake. They'd created a dummy account and sent forged approval forms from it. And the platform hadn't caught it, because why would it? The details matched. The name was close enough. Her right hand twitched, not out of pain, but rage. She opened her real email, pulled the official fundraiser link, attached the screenshots of the form, the fake email, the co-manager notice, and sent them all to Diane. Subject line, "I need a digital trail. Back me up." She hit send. Her head was pounding. She took 2 slow breaths and lowered herself back onto the pillows. 20 minutes later, the iPad buzzed with a new message. "Diane, do you know they listed you as co-manager of the campaign?" Margaret stared at the screen, her fingers curling over the blanket like she was holding something sharp and unseen. She typed a response, but before she could hit send, another notification appeared, an automatic alert. Someone had just tried to reset her bank account password. Anyone who asked questions disappeared from the thread. Margaret had begun to treat the evenings like reconnaissance. After Claire and Travis left the house, usually for what they called errand time, which lately seemed to include a lot of wine and celebratory meals, she would wait in her room until the front door closed, then slowly maneuver the iPad back into her lap. Each click and scroll now felt deliberate, purposeful, like the way she used to audit school records after hours when something didn't sit right. This time the records were comments, and the discrepancies weren't just clerical. They were personal. She opened the fundraiser again. The page looked unchanged at first glance. Her name in bold letters. Her face featured front and center in an image she hadn't known had been taken. But this time, Margaret wasn't looking at photos. She scrolled directly to the comments. At first, she saw the familiar patterns: outpourings of support, lines of prayer hands, and messages from old students, staff members, and even distant relatives offering everything from grocery gift cards to full financial contributions. But tucked in between these well-meaning wishes were glimpses of something else. Faint, but distinct. Just wondering if we can see an expense breakdown? My aunt knows Margaret. Is there a medical update from her doctor? Did she personally approve this campaign? Margaret's eyes paused over that last one. The wording was respectful. It didn't accuse. It asked. And yet, when she refreshed the screen a moment later, it was gone. She blinked, unsure if her hand had slipped or the app had glitched. But then she saw another one vanish, right in front of her. The page refreshed automatically, and where once there had been a polite question, now there was nothing but blank white space. She sat back, breath slowing. These weren't algorithm glitches, they were deliberate deletions. She reopened the page and started screen capturing each suspicious comment. One by one, she saved them. Messages that questioned where the funds were going, or why the updates sounded rehearsed. She saw that users who commented more than once were suddenly listed as unavailable or blocked. Margaret switched apps and navigated to the Dropbox folder Diane had created for her. She uploaded every image there, carefully labeling each file with timestamps, usernames, and the comment's content. Then she created a backup folder on a separate cloud service just in case. The erasure was too precise, too strategic. These weren't trolls being filtered. They were donors, friends, people who cared enough to ask the kind of questions Claire and Travis didn't want public. That realization did something to Margaret. It didn't ignite rage. It solidified resolve. She opened her email and typed into the search bar, Baltimore plus fundraiser fraud plus news contact. The results brought her to the Baltimore Ledger, a regional paper known for exposing local corruption and nonprofit abuse. She clicked the tips link and was redirected to a secure, anonymous submission form. She hesitated only for a moment before typing. To whom it may concern, I'm a relative of Margaret Callahan. Her name and image are being used in an online medical fundraiser that may be misleading donors. I've attached evidence of deleted comments and discrepancies between stated medical needs and actual use of funds. Please investigate this quietly. She is vulnerable, and they know it. She attached 5 screenshots, including one with a donation amount marked "Refund Requested," and hit send. Less than an hour later, a reply came through her encrypted email. Thank you. You're not the first person to flag this couple. Let's talk. Mallory Lott, investigative journalist, The Baltimore Ledger. Margaret stared at the message, heart thudding, not from fear, but recognition. Someone else had noticed. She wasn't alone in this. Her suspicions weren't delusions. They were patterns. Just as she was about to close the iPad, one last comment caught her eye. It was newly posted by a donor with a verified badge, but the words made her chest tighten. Where's the money going? I'm contacting the IRS. Margaret didn't blink. She saved it too, before it disappeared. The comment vanished less than a minute later, wiped clean like the others. But this time Margaret smiled faintly, because now she wasn't just watching, she was documenting. And someone else was finally watching too. I was listed as the organizer, but I never clicked create. The lie wasn't just spoken, it was coded. Margaret realized that now. Her face, her story, her trauma, they hadn't just been misused. They'd been digitally embedded into a false narrative built by someone else's keystrokes. She needed help, someone who understood the language of logins and metadata better than she ever had. That's when she thought of Willa, her sister's granddaughter, 19, razor-smart college freshman with a part-time job fixing campus printers and hacking into her own locked dorm room, just for fun. Margaret used Diane's phone to text her, Willa, I need tech help, quietly. Can you visit Sunday? Willa showed up 2 days later in a hoodie and Converse, her laptop already under her arm and curiosity practically buzzing off her. She hugged Margaret gently, like she wasn't sure how fragile her great-aunt had become, and then got straight to work. I won't touch anything unless you say so, she said, logging on to the guest Wi-Fi with practiced speed. "But if there's a trail, I'll find it." Margaret handed over the iPad and gave her access to the Fundraiser dashboard. She watched the screen from her bed, silent but burning with anticipation. Within 15 minutes, Willa sat back. "You're listed as the original campaign organizer." Margaret felt her chest tighten. "That's not possible. I've never even visited the site before this month." Willa nodded. "I believe you. But your name and photo are attached to the account as the creator. I just checked the metadata. It's public-facing. But the backend tells a different story." She opened a log file on the screen and zoomed in. "The IP address that launched the campaign? It's based in Richmond. That's Claire and Travis's house, not yours." Margaret let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. There it was. Proof. "And this," Willa said, pulling up another screen, "is the account that uploaded the first 5 photos, the ones of you in the hospital." Margaret squinted. "Whose account is that?" Willa hesitated, then turned the screen so Margaret could read it herself. The email was Travis's. Margaret stared for a long time. Then quietly, she said, "Keep going." Willa tapped through several folders. "Now this is where it gets sticky. See here? He uploaded receipts to justify platform disbursements. These are used to prove the money's being spent properly." Margaret leaned forward. The receipts were for wheelchair modifications, hospital transport upgrades, medical consultation copays. It looked clean, at first, but something felt off. Willa clicked one of the PDFs and raised an eyebrow. "That invoice? It's for a Tilton Space wheelchair lift. Retail price, $6,800, but that model's not here. This brand's unique. Front-locking brakes, detachable armor, Saint design. I worked in a rehab center over the summer. The one you use? It's not this. It's a standard hospital issue. Medicaid would have provided it for free." Margaret felt a wave of nausea. "He bought something else, didn't he?" Willa nodded slowly. "Or not at all. This receipt looks photoshopped, numbers don't align, and the vendor's phone number leads to a disconnected line." Margaret picked up her notebook, her real one, not the cloud archive, and began jotting down phrases: false receipt, platform deception, IP mismatch, fabricated vendor. Willa sat back. "So, what do you want to do?" Margaret didn't answer immediately. She stared out the window, sunlight falling gently through the blinds, casting stripes across her bed like prison bars. Then she looked back at Willa. "I want to report it, but not as a victim. As a witness. I want them to hear it from the name they put on the campaign." The next morning, with Diane's help, Margaret composed a formal report. She included screenshots of the back-end IP log, receipts Willa had flagged as false, a time-stamped list of discrepancies, and her notarized statement confirming she never initiated or consented to the campaign creation. She attached everything to the contact form for the Fundraiser platform's fraud division and wrote one clear subject line: "Subject, fraudulent campaign operating under my name." She hovered over the send button, then clicked. 10 minutes later, a confirmation email arrived. "Your report has been received. A member of our fraud team will contact you directly." Margaret closed the laptop and whispered, "Now let's see if silence is still part of their plan." She looked at my chart, then looked at me differently. Margaret had grown used to people talking around her, nurses speaking in exaggerated tones like she was a child or half-sedated, friends stopping by with casseroles and sad eyes, thanking Claire for the updates, as if Margaret weren't sitting 2 feet away. It wasn't the silence that wore her down, it was the assumption that her silence meant absence. Then came Lexi. Lexi wasn't like the others. She was new, mid-30s, soft-spoken, with warm brown eyes and a careful, clinical precision to the way she moved through the room. Margaret noticed her hesitations, small, telling pauses as she read the notes Claire handed her, eyes narrowing slightly at the discrepancies. On her second visit, Lexi placed a blood pressure cuff around Margaret's arm, glanced down at the tablet in her lap, and said in a voice that didn't match the content, "So, still nonverbal. Expresses confusion when prompted. No signs of independent thought." Margaret blinked once, slowly. Deliberately. Lexi caught it. She leaned in, whispering just above a murmur, "Can you understand me?" Another blink. Lexi shifted her body to block the hallway door from view, then raised a finger. Once for yes, twice for no. Margaret blinked once. Yes. Lexi straightened slowly, her voice now detached and professional again, but her eyes flicked once toward the hallway. "Let's go ahead and get your temperature. Open, please." Margaret parted her lips. It was subtle, but deliberate. Lexi held the thermometer steady, her face unreadable, but as she packed her bag to leave, she placed a note gently beneath Margaret's pillow. Later that evening, when Margaret was sure she was alone, she pulled the folded slip of paper into view. The handwriting was clean, small. "I know you're aware. I don't trust her either. If you want help, real help, blink once next time I'm here. Lexi." 3 days later, Lexi returned. This time she arrived with a different energy. No clipboard, no small talk with Claire. She came in, checked Margaret's vitals as usual, then knelt beside the bed and said softly, "I need to ask something, and I want you to be honest." Margaret gave her the blink. Lexi nodded. "Your daughter's been theatrical. She said you didn't recognize her yesterday, but when I asked if you were in pain, you responded. Not just randomly, appropriately." Margaret stared at her, unblinking. "She told me your speech was slurred, inconsistent, but your vitals don't suggest confusion or decline, and your chart says you passed your last cognition eval." Margaret closed her eyes, slowly, then opened them. Lexi hesitated, then said, "If I record something, proof of what she's doing, would you be okay with that?" A single blink. "Don't worry," she added. "It won't go to my supervisors, not yet, but you need something concrete if you want people to believe you." Lexi got her proof sooner than expected. That afternoon, Claire returned for a scheduled donor Zoom call. Margaret had overheard her scheduling it that morning. "Big donors," she'd said. "Need reassurance that Mom's still tragic." Lexi offered to assist with Margaret's care during the call, a suggestion Claire eagerly accepted. "It'll make us look more legit," she whispered, unaware of the recorder in Lexi's coat pocket. Margaret sat, quietly in the background, her blanket pulled up over her lap. On screen, Claire spoke gently, mournfully, as if giving a eulogy. "She can't really form words," she said, voice cracking just enough. "Most days she barely knows where she is. It's heartbreaking." Lexi glanced at Margaret. Her eyes were narrow, calm, present, focused. After the call ended, Lexi stayed behind. "Got it," she whispered, holding up the hidden recorder. "Audio and video." Later that night, with Diane's help, Margaret uploaded the file to her secured Dropbox folder and named it Truth Archive, Exhibit A. She didn't feel satisfaction. Not yet. But she felt something close to control. The next morning, while checking her Dropbox folder, Margaret noticed a new file had appeared, a second recording, uploaded by Lexi without a word. Its title simply read, Exhibit B, Kitchen Conversation. They weren't saving me. They were renovating their kitchen. Margaret sat at the dining table, the sun casting long rectangles of light across the oak. It was her first morning sitting without assistance, just a cane nearby, in reach. Diane sat beside her, laptop open, her fingers moving fast across the keyboard. Lexi hovered behind, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "I knew something was off," Diane muttered, tilting the screen toward Margaret. "But this isn't just careless, it's coordinated." On the screen was a Home Depot invoice, not just for paint or light bulbs. It listed high-end kitchen appliances, a stainless steel French door refrigerator, a dual-fuel commercial-grade stove, imported backsplash tiles, and 2 quartz countertop slabs. The purchase date? 4 days ago. Margaret didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her hand, steady on the table, reached toward the manila folder beside her, the one where she'd started keeping screenshots of Claire's updates to the fundraiser. She flipped to the page that corresponded with that same date. There it was, in Claire's dramatic prose. Mom suffered a serious overnight setback. We had to pay out of pocket for a private transport service to get her to an emergency evaluation. Every bit of support matters right now." Lexi let out a low whistle. "No transport company charges $6,000 for a 30-minute ride, especially when you never left the house." Diane nodded. "They're moving the money. Every big donation is followed by a big personal spend, no receipts to match, just stories." She opened another tab and clicked into a shared spreadsheet. "We've been tracking every public donation since the fundraiser launched. There's a pattern." She pointed to a column labeled Donation Spike and another labeled Corresponding Expense. Margaret followed the rows. Donation, $1,200. Next day, a new washer-dryer delivery. Donation, $900. Same day, payment to Travis Renovation LLC, a shell business that Claire had mentioned in passing weeks ago as his little side hustle. "They're laundering it," Diane said flatly, "badly, but enough to fool casual donors." Margaret took a deep breath, the kind that traveled all the way down her ribs and came back up with clarity. "Then we stopped being casual." That evening, while Claire buzzed around the kitchen prepping for her supporter brunch, Margaret sat quietly in the den, iPad in her lap, Dropbox open. Her folder now included timestamps, invoices, Claire's campaign updates, and Lexi's recordings, all cataloged and named. Diane had organized it like an evidence binder. The brunch was supposed to be a soft thank you event for a few high-dollar donors. Claire had sent out emails, RSVPs collected through a casual form, and prepped the house like a realtor, staging a high-end listing. Travis polished the new countertops until they gleamed under the pendant lights. Margaret watched it all from the shadows of the hallway. "Remember," Claire said as she arranged place cards, "keep the energy warm. Mom might come out for a few minutes just to wave. We want her to look grateful, not overwhelmed." That word, grateful, hit Margaret like a slap. She turned and went back to her room. She opened her email. To Mallory Lott, CC, Sarah Enders, Baltimore Weekly. Subject, "You're invited to brunch. Dear Ms. Lott and Ms. Enders, I believe the best stories come with canapes. If you're free this Sunday at noon, my daughter Claire and her husband Travis are hosting a private brunch for Fundraiser supporters. I believe you'd find the guest list and the decor illuminating. Consider this an anonymous invitation. Dress casual, RSVP not required. A friend who's been watching." She hit send. The morning of the brunch, Margaret allowed Claire to roll her out to the sunroom for a brief appearance. Her hair was brushed, her cheeks pinched pink with light makeup Claire insisted on, but her eyes, those were all Margaret, clear, sharp, focused. As guests arrived, laughter floated down the hallway. Margaret could smell fresh croissants, lemon polish on the floor, and the faint trace of Claire's perfume, something floral and forced. And then the doorbell rang. Twice. A pause. Then, once again. Claire called cheerfully, "Can someone grab that? I'm plating the fruit." Margaret turned her head toward the hallway just as she saw two women step through the door, one holding a small notebook, the other wearing a press badge clipped discreetly to her blouse. Margaret smiled to herself, then opened her iPad and renamed the brunch folder in her Dropbox, Exhibit C, Hospitality Fraud. They staged a toast. I recorded a breakdown. The scent of warmed pastries and citrus glaze clung to the air as Margaret was wheeled into the sunroom, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Claire had draped a shawl over her shoulders. Soft blue cashmere, too formal for the weather, but perfect for a photo. The windows were wide open, letting in a spring breeze thick with lilac and pollen. On the surface, everything looked warm, almost celebratory. But beneath the curated atmosphere, tension pulsed like a second heartbeat. Margaret felt it in the way Claire fluttered from guest to guest with the desperation of someone trying to manage a script. She felt it in the way Travis laughed too loudly at his own jokes, and she especially felt it when the two unfamiliar women entered through the side door, carrying gift bags and soft smiles. They looked like donors, dressed in pastels and scarves, each wearing a lanyard tag labeled with a name Margaret didn't recognize. But she knew. From the way one of them scanned the room with professional precision to the way the other angled her phone slightly as she greeted Claire. It was them. The reporters. Margaret said nothing, just smiled. Claire waved toward her like an MC presenting an award. And of course, the woman behind it all, my mom. She's doing so well. Aren't you, Mom? Margaret gave a small nod and held the smile. It was rehearsed, but not dishonest. She was doing well, just not for the reasons Claire believed. Let's bring everyone into the kitchen, Travis called out, gesturing toward the marble countertops gleaming under recessed lights. It's where the magic happened. His voice had taken on a public tone, just slightly louder, the way people speak when they imagine their words being quoted. Guests gathered, sipping mimosas from etched flutes, complimenting the remodeled space. You've created something beautiful, one of the reporters said with polite enthusiasm. Travis grinned. It's not just about us. It's what community can do when they rally around a cause. Margaret caught the flash of a phone camera angled toward the custom cabinetry. She made note of the timing. Then came the toast. Claire raised her glass. To resilience, to healing, to the people who make second chances possible. Everyone clinked glasses. Margaret lifted hers halfway. The moment passed like a pageant wave, glittery, hollow. But things shifted when one of the reporters gently asked, "Have you considered starting a foundation?" Travis's eyes lit up. Funny you ask. We've actually discussed launching something, maybe a small nonprofit, stroke awareness, family caregiving resources. We've got experience now, right? He chuckled, then added, we just want to give back. Margaret glanced at Lexi, standing near the back, camera phone subtly recording from a clutch purse. Claire nodded earnestly. It's been humbling. When you're put in the position to become a caretaker overnight, it changes you. Margaret felt a slow burn rise behind her sternum. The room had turned into a theater, and they were center stage, soaking in applause they hadn't earned. Later, as guests thinned out and Claire ushered people toward dessert, Margaret remained by the window, quiet and alert. The second reporter approached her alone, crouching slightly to meet her gaze. I just wanted to say, you look good, strong, the woman said, voice low and kind. Margaret looked at her. Really looked. No disguise could hide the sharpness in those eyes, the patience of someone who already knew what she was seeing. The woman slipped a card into Margaret's hand, tucked just beneath the napkin resting in her lap. She straightened before anyone noticed and whispered with practiced calm, "When you're ready, we're listening." Then she was gone, fading into the crowd as casually as she'd arrived. As Margaret wheeled herself slowly back to her room, the card still hidden beneath the folds of her shawl, she noticed the Dropbox app on her iPad blinking with a new upload from Lexi. The file name read, foundationpitchaudio.mp3. They thought the platform wouldn't notice. I made sure it did. The cursor hovered over the submit button like it was wired to a detonator. Margaret sat at the edge of her bed, the iPad heavy in her lap. The screen glowed back at her with a final review of the fraud report. Dozens of files attached. Every screenshot, every fake invoice, Lexi's recordings, the brunch footage, the list of deleted donor comments. It was all there, neatly organized, surgically precise. The platform's fraud portal asked only one question at the top of the screen. Are you the campaign organizer or a third-party reporting suspected abuse? Margaret tapped, campaign organizer. She didn't hesitate after that. The moment her finger pressed the screen, the browser flickered and loaded a confirmation message. Your report has been received. Our trust and safety team will contact you directly if additional details are needed. She exhaled slowly, the kind of breath you take before walking into court. Then she waited. It took 36 hours. In that time, Claire and Travis went about their lives with the confidence of people who believed the story still belonged to them. Claire posted a smiling photo of herself with a bouquet of sunflowers and the caption, "Our community continues to amaze us. Every dollar helps us keep Mom supported and loved." It was liked 412 times. Travis uploaded a slow pan of their kitchen with soft piano music over it, writing, "Home is healing. Thank you to everyone who's made this possible." Margaret watched it all. She said nothing, not until the platform emailed her back. The message was blunt. We've reviewed your evidence and flagged the fundraiser for misrepresentation and financial irregularities. The account has been frozen. Payout suspended pending investigation. 2 sentences. That's all it took to shatter the illusion. Margaret forwarded the email to Diane and Lexi. Lexi replied instantly. You did it. Now wait for the fallout. And it didn't take long. The front door slammed so hard that the walls in Margaret's bedroom trembled. She looked up just as Claire stormed into the room, her face flushed, hair wild around her shoulders. She didn't even close the door behind her. What did you do? She demanded, voice sharp enough to cut glass. Margaret remained seated, her hands folded neatly in her lap, expression unreadable. The campaign is frozen, Claire's voice pitched upward. We were 2 days from another disbursement, and now it's locked. We can't touch a cent. Margaret said nothing. Her eyes met Claire's with a calm that only made her daughter angrier. They said the organizer reported it, Claire spat. You don't even know how to work an app and now you're a whistleblower? She took a step forward, hands clenching at her sides. We needed that money. You think Medicaid covers half the things you use in this house? Margaret's voice, when it came, was low but steady. I read every line of your invoices, Claire. Every dollar tagged as wheelchair support that was spent on wine fridges and imported tile. I know what you did. Claire blinked, thrown. What are you talking about? Don't pretend you didn't fake receipts, Margaret continued, her tone sharpened by certainty. Don't pretend you didn't list me as the campaign organizer and forge a medical release. Don't pretend you didn't lie to people who trusted me. Claire's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her composure cracked, just slightly. I should have pressed charges already, Margaret added, her voice barely above a whisper now. I'm giving you time, but that window is closing. Claire's eyes filled with something halfway between rage and disbelief. You're my mother, she hissed. No, Margaret said. I was your campaign. Claire turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame shook again. Margaret didn't flinch. A moment later, a soft chime pinged from the iPad. Another email. From the platform's legal team. Due to the severity of your report, we've escalated this to internal counsel. Please preserve all related communications. A representative will follow up within 72 hours. Margaret set the iPad down and stared out the window. The house was too quiet now, like something had evacuated the air. Down the hall, Claire's voice erupted in a panicked phone call. Margaret couldn't hear the full conversation, just fragments through the vent, but one word cut through, clear as a bell. Lawyer. They edited out every truth I whispered. Margaret heard the door before she saw Claire. It opened with a softness that didn't match the woman who stepped in. Claire wasn't storming this time. She was composed, too composed, the kind of calm that warned of a different kind of storm. Claire closed the door behind her, slowly. We need to talk. Margaret didn't respond. She sat upright in bed, the morning light casting long shadows across the comforter. Her hands rested lightly on her lap. Her face was neutral, but her eyes were alert. I've been speaking with someone, Claire said, taking a seat in the corner chair. A professional. And I think it's time we consider whether you're managing things properly. Margaret tilted her head slightly. Be specific. Claire exhaled, practiced and soft. You've been confused, erratic. You think you're being spied on, recorded. You've accused us of stealing from you. It's not rational. And now that the fundraiser is frozen, you're putting everything we've built at risk? You mean everything you stole? Margaret said evenly. Claire's mouth curved, but there was no humor in it. I'm concerned, Mom. You're vulnerable, and I have to consider guardianship if you can't make sound decisions. Margaret looked at her daughter, really looked. The same girl she used to walk to school in Mary Jane's and pigtails, the same one who cried when she lost a spelling bee in 3rd grade and begged to sleep in her mother's bed, now sitting across from her, threatening to take away her legal autonomy because she'd been caught. Margaret reached for the phone beside her. I already spoke to an attorney. Claire blinked. I've started the paperwork to revoke your medical power of attorney, Margaret said, voice unwavering. As of today, you no longer speak for me, legally or otherwise. Claire stood up too fast, knocking the chair slightly off balance. You're not thinking straight. Margaret looked down at the phone, tapped a name on speed dial, then raised her eyes again. I also scheduled a second cognitive evaluation. Independent. Licensed. Claire didn't speak. The mask of control faltered, just for a breath, but she recovered quickly, brushing imaginary lint off her sleeve. "You want a war? Fine," she said. "But don't forget who's been feeding you, dressing you, managing your care." "No," Margaret interrupted. "You've been managing a brand, one built on my body, my silence, and your false narrative." Claire didn't reply. She turned and left, the door swinging wider than before. The evaluator arrived the next morning. A woman in her late 50s with a calm demeanor and a clipboard that never left her hand. She wore no expression of judgment, only curiosity, and her questions were firm but fair. Margaret answered everyone without hesitation. "What year is it?" 2025. "Who's the current president?" "Still the one I didn't vote for." "Spell world backward. DLROW." The session lasted 45 minutes. The evaluator didn't smile, didn't nod. She simply worked through her list, quietly recording observations, noting reflexes and memory recall. At one point, she asked Margaret to recall a short story she had just read aloud. Margaret repeated it word for word. When the evaluator finally closed her folder, she stood up slowly. "I won't speak on the official record yet," she said quietly. "But off the record, you're sharp, very sharp." Margaret didn't move, but her breath deepened. The evaluator leaned closer. "You're doing the right thing. I've seen these cases. You're not confused. You're being manipulated." She walked out of the room, clipboard in hand. But not before Margaret saw what she'd written on the top of the form. Recommendation: full cognitive capacity, capable of independent decision-making. If they used my face to steal, I used theirs to expose. The folder Margaret handed to her attorney weighed less than a pound, but the power inside it could crack the foundation Claire and Travis had so carefully built. She sat upright in her wheelchair in the polished, wood-paneled conference room. Sunlight filtered in through the tall window behind her, throwing soft light over the documents on the table, paper that no longer just documented injustice, but turned it into ammunition. Across from her, Mr. Calhoun, her attorney, adjusted his glasses and flipped through the contents. One by one. "Lexi's affidavit is airtight," he said. "Direct observation, timeline verified, multiple corroborating events. It even includes the video logs." Margaret gave a small nod. She didn't need to hear it again. She had memorized the layout of the file like one memorizes the architecture of a battlefield. "And this spreadsheet from Diane," he continued, "every donation mapped against Claire's personal expenditures. It's detailed enough to make a forensic accountant cry." He looked up, impressed. "You've built a compelling case." Margaret's voice was steady. "Now make it undeniable." Filing the whistleblower complaint took nearly an hour. The submission portal for the State Attorney General's Elder Exploitation Task Force required multiple verification steps, identity confirmation, and secure uploading of attachments. Mr. Calhoun handled the legal formatting. Margaret dictated the body. Whistleblower submission. Subject: fraudulent fundraising and financial abuse of elderly individual. My name is Margaret Callahan. I am 62 years old and suffered a stroke earlier this year. My daughter Claire and her husband Travis have been running an online fundraiser in my name, using falsified medical records, forged documents, and staged photos to raise over $85,000 under false pretenses. I never approved this fundraiser. I never authorized them to act as my legal proxy or to spend these funds on anything unrelated to my care. What they've done is not just unethical, it is criminal, and I am ready to testify. She attached Lexi's affidavit, which included 3 key excerpts from audio and video recording. One of them showed Claire staging a moment for the camera, asking Lexi to just lower the lights. It looks more dramatic that way. Another clip included Travis laughing with a friend on speakerphone. As long as she stays in that chair, the money keeps coming. At Margaret's request, Diane added a signed and notarized analysis of the fund's disbursement trail. Her years of experience managing administrative budgets at Bay Ridge Academy had made her meticulous. She labeled every expense Claire had falsely claimed, marked every transaction routed through Travis's LLC, and highlighted 3 key dates where personal purchases matched major donation spikes. It was all included. Margaret watched as the screen finally blinked and displayed, "Your whistleblower complaint has been received. Assigned case number EX-2751-A." That evening, Margaret sat alone in her room. The house was quiet. Claire had barely spoken to her in 2 days. The kitchen remodel had come to a full stop. No contractors, no background drilling, only silence. Margaret liked the silence. It made the truth easier to hear. She opened her iPad and checked her inbox. One unread message. From State Attorney General's Office, Elder Protection Division subject, Notice of Preliminary Review. Message: Dear Ms. Callahan, we are writing to confirm that your whistleblower report has been accepted for initial review. Our office has opened a preliminary inquiry into the alleged financial exploitation detailed in your submission. A case officer has been assigned, and a sealed formal notice will be mailed to your address within 3 to 5 business days. Margaret's fingers trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from something that felt like beginning again. She reached for the journal on her nightstand, the one Diane had given her with an embossed title, What They Didn't Expect. She flipped to a blank page and wrote 4 words in large, even letters. It finally started today. The next afternoon, Claire brought in the mail and tossed a large, flat envelope on Margaret's lap without a word. The seal bore the crest of the state of Maryland. Margaret stared at it for a moment, then opened it with both hands. Inside was a single page, printed in bold at the top. We've begun review. They controlled every room, until I set the table. The dining room had always been Claire's stage. Mismatched candles arranged in curated clusters, linen napkins folded into impossible angles, hors d'oeuvres prepped like she was hosting a food segment instead of a family meal. But today, the table was stripped bare. No spread, no ambiance. Just 3 chairs, 3 glasses of water, and a slim, sealed folder placed precisely at each seat. Margaret waited in silence at the head of the table, dressed in soft gray slacks and a cardigan, her cane hooked neatly on the back of her chair. Lexi helped her settle in earlier that morning, then quietly exited the house with a knowing nod. Diane was on standby outside, documents backed up in triplicate. The real work, though, was Margaret's to do. She had asked Claire and Travis to come at noon. The tone of the invitation, family update private, had been just ambiguous enough to bait them in. She'd learned from them, after all. Language mattered when you wanted control. The door swung open at 11:57. Claire breezed in first, glossy hair pulled into a high ponytail, face carefully made up to project concern. Travis followed, wearing a navy pullover and carrying a confident smirk. Neither of them looked concerned. "Mom," Claire said, a practiced smile already in place, "you're looking so much better. This meeting, it's about the AG nonsense, right? Because we can straighten that out." "Sit," Margaret said, her voice low but clear. She gestured to the chairs. Claire blinked, thrown for half a beat by the command, but she obeyed. Travis hesitated, then followed. No one touched the glasses of water. The air was too still. "I assume you've seen the seal?" Margaret said, tapping the envelope in front of her. "You can go ahead and open yours." Claire's fingers twitched before she lifted the flap. Her eyes scanned the top line of the AG letter, and her posture stiffened. Travis reached for his with a bit more speed, flipping the page like it might reveal a joke on the second read. Margaret waited until the silence stretched too long to ignore. "That's a real investigation," she said, her tone sharper now. "And before either of you speak, I want to be clear. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm asking for return of funds, every unaccounted cent. Or we take this public." Claire laughed once, sharp and incredulous. "You think you have leverage? You're just mad, hurt. You don't understand how these things look outside your little window." Margaret reached for the second document. She slid it across the table like a playing card, a 2-page draft formatted in columned newsprint. Mother's stroke fund misused by own daughter. Records suggest fraud. There were no photos yet, but the facts were typed in crisp, unforgiving black ink: donation receipts, false invoices, Lexi's affidavit excerpts, quotes from anonymous donors, and one devastating line from Diane. She trusted them to protect her. They used her to upgrade their countertops. Travis paled. Claire snatched the draft, eyes scanning like she could redact it with sheer speed. "This doesn't go live," Margaret said. "If I see a wire transfer for the full misused amount, less verifiable expenses, within 48 hours. Otherwise, it runs on Sunday." Print and digital Claire dropped the pages, her voice quiet. "You'd humiliate us publicly?" Margaret didn't blink. "You already did that to me." The room held a breathless pause, punctuated only by the soft hum of the refrigerator cycling in the kitchen. Travis looked at Claire. "How much can we stall? Maybe we say it's being reviewed by our accountant." "No," Margaret said, rising slowly from her chair, using the cane with practiced grace. "You don't get to spin it this time." As Claire opened her mouth to reply, Margaret added one final sentence, slicing clean through the tension like a blade. "You have 48 hours to return the funds, or the story prints Sunday morning." They counted every donation, but not public outrage. The article dropped before sunrise. Margaret was still in bed when Diane texted the link. No emojis, no commentary, just the headline pasted in full: "Mother's Stroke Fund abused by own daughter. Records suggest misuse of donations." Byline: Mallory Lott, investigative correspondent, The Baltimore Ledger. By the time Margaret opened the page on her iPad, the share count had already crossed 2,000. Beneath the title was a cropped photo of her, head turned slightly, hand resting in her lap, face solemn and clear-eyed. The caption read, "Margaret Callahan, 62, says she never authorized the fundraiser that bore her name." Her fingers hovered over the scroll bar. She didn't need to read the body of the article. She'd lived it. But she scrolled anyway, watching the truth take shape in sentences she didn't have to speak aloud anymore. Claire's name appeared in bold 5 times, Travis's 6. The article listed donation totals, timelines, and quotes from anonymous donors, people who had given in good faith, then watched in confusion as the updates grew vague and the gratitude grew performative. One quote stood out: "I donated because I believed in the strength of that woman. Turns out she was strong enough to stop them herself." Margaret set the iPad down without a word. At 9:15 a.m., the door slammed. Claire burst into the room, phone in hand, her voice ragged and shaking. "Did you leak it?" she shouted, eyes wide and red. Margaret didn't answer. She simply looked at the cane resting by the bed, then turned her gaze back to her daughter. "My boss called at 8 o'clock, Claire snapped. "I've been placed on leave pending ethical concerns. They said there'll be a review board meeting next week. Do you know what that means?" Margaret sat still, letting the words hang in the air like a warning. Claire paced the room, panic rising in her voice. "Do you even understand what you've done? This isn't just embarrassing, it's permanent." Margaret raised her eyebrows. "Good. So are spinal injuries." Claire stopped cold, mouth slightly open. Whatever she was going to say next dissolved before it could form. Meanwhile, Travis's phone lit up on the kitchen counter. Missed calls, texts. One read, "We're pulling the design contract. We don't work with frauds." Another, "Saw the Ledger article. Refund my deposit by Friday or I'm filing a complaint." He scrolled furiously, mouth tight, then tossed the phone into the sink. By noon, social media had taken over. Fundraiser donors posted screenshots of their contributions with the hashtag #Fundraiser fraud. One woman wrote, "This was my mom's retirement money." She believed she was helping another mother survive. Comments poured in under every archived fundraiser post. Claire tried deleting them, but they came faster than she could click. Even people who had once defended her were turning. We were duped. If she really needed help, why is there a Viking stove in the photos? Her mother told the truth. That says everything. By late afternoon, Margaret received an email from the hosting platform. "Dear Ms. Callahan, following our internal investigation and the submission of third-party evidence, we are notifying you that the fundraiser titled Healing for Margaret has been permanently removed from our site. Additionally, the accounts registered to Claire Callahan and Travis Borden have been permanently suspended and are no longer eligible to host or co-manage fundraisers on this platform. We appreciate your courage in coming forward. Margaret read it twice, slowly, then forwarded it to Diane with just one sentence. They're out of the game. She leaned back in her chair, letting the silence stretch. Through the window, she could see a neighbor walking her dog, oblivious to the war that had just ended behind these walls. Not with shouting, not with fists, but with truth, documented and exposed. The next morning, as Margaret sipped her coffee and turned on the local news, the anchor's voice cut through the air. Breaking this hour, Maryland's Attorney General has confirmed a formal investigation into elder financial exploitation. A name you may recognize is now at the center of it. I couldn't feel half my body, but I could feel the justice. The morning the audit was confirmed, the house was so quiet, it felt like Margaret could hear her own pulse ticking beneath her skin. Rain tapped gently on the kitchen skylight, a hushed percussion against the stillness. Claire hadn't spoken in 2 days, and Travis was nowhere to be seen. But Margaret didn't need words. She had paper. An envelope bearing the seal of the Maryland Attorney General's office had arrived at sunrise. It was hand-delivered by a courier in a black windbreaker who refused coffee and said nothing beyond a stiff nod. Margaret opened the letter in her lap, hands slow but steady. Dear Ms. Callahan, we are initiating a full-scale audit and review of all financial transactions connected to the fundraiser campaign titled Healing for Margaret. Your documentation has been accepted into evidence. You may track the case status through the secure portal below. Attached was a private login code and contact information for the lead investigator. Margaret exhaled, a slow, centered breath, the kind she used to practice between meetings when angry parents demanded explanations for rules their children had broken. She logged in using the code. The portal was stark and unadorned. Status, Review Active Investigator. Assigned B. Renner. Last update, documents received. Pre-charging stage initiated. She bookmarked the page. Later that afternoon, a second letter came, this time via email. From the fundraiser platform itself. The message wasn't automated. It was personal, signed by a director of compliance and addressed directly to her. Ms. Callahan, we sincerely apologize for the harm you experienced under our name. While we have safeguards in place, your case has revealed vulnerabilities we are now addressing. All disbursements from the fundraiser have been frozen and recovery procedures are underway. Your integrity in coming forward is appreciated. You now have direct case access and a dedicated liaison. It ended with a simple line, "You should never have had to do this alone." Margaret stared at those words for a long time. She didn't cry, but she allowed herself the smallest smile, worn at the edges, but real. That evening, Claire came into the room without knocking. Her eyes were swollen, hair pulled back like she hadn't slept. "I want to talk," she said, voice trembling at the edges. "Please." Margaret closed the iPad without looking up. "About what?" "I messed up," Claire whispered. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. I thought I could manage it, until I couldn't." "You didn't just hurt me," Margaret said, folding her hands. "You auctioned off my pain." Claire knelt beside her, desperation bleeding into her voice. "I'm sorry, okay? I didn't know how else to fix things. The bills, the house, everything was piling up. I thought, if I could just hold it together for a few more weeks." "But you weren't holding anything together," Margaret interrupted, calm but cutting. "You were siphoning sympathy to fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford, and you used me to do it." Claire's eyes welled up. "I'll fix it. I'll return it. I'll write everyone back. Just don't let this ruin my life." Margaret met her gaze. "I'll consider forgiveness," she said slowly, "after the last dollar is returned. Not a moment before." Claire stood there a second longer, then left without another word, the door clicking shut behind her. Night settled quietly. Rain still whispered against the glass. Margaret sat alone with a cup of tea, lukewarm but comforting. She opened her laptop, refreshed the case portal. No change. Then a new email pinged. The subject line was short. Update, charges filed. From B. Renner, State Investigator. Margaret opened it with one breath held in her chest. Ms. Callahan, we are moving forward. Charges are being filed with the District Court for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, wire fraud, and identity misrepresentation. We will be in contact regarding your statement. Margaret closed the laptop slowly, hands still, and eyes bright with clarity. For the first time in months, she whispered into the quiet, "It's happening." They used my image to fake strength. I used the truth to show it. The auditorium was modest but filled. Folding chairs arranged in even rows, each one occupied by someone who had, in one way or another, touched or been touched by a story like hers. There were caregivers with tired eyes, adult children clinging to guilt, advocates in pressed suits, and seniors sitting, straight-backed, alert, listening for something that sounded like their own silence breaking. At the front of the room stood a podium beneath a soft wash of overhead lighting. A placard on the front read, "Elder Justice Now, Annual Fundraising Gala." In the back, Margaret sat near the aisle in her wheelchair, her hands folded over her lap, waiting. She wasn't nervous. What she felt was deeper than nerves. It was readiness. The kind that settles in your bones once the fear has burned out and what's left is resolve. When the MC called her name, the room offered polite applause, then grew still again. Diane helped her to the podium, placed the pages of her speech in front of her, and offered a reassuring touch to her shoulder before stepping back. Margaret adjusted the microphone slightly. No music, no fanfare, just her voice. "I used to believe strength was something quiet," she began, her voice firm, deliberate. "Something you didn't need to show for it to be real. And then one day I woke up unable to speak. I couldn't move half my body. I couldn't cry. I couldn't scream. But I could hear." A few nods rippled through the front row. People were listening the way they listen to lived truths, not for performance, but for recognition. I heard my daughter counting donation targets outside my hospital room. I heard my name used as currency. I watched my own suffering get turned into content, into photos, into sympathy posts signed with captions I didn't write. She paused, letting the silence settle. Then, and I realized the only thing more dangerous than being silenced is being spoken for. The crowd didn't stir. It leaned in. So I learned to listen like it was an act of survival. I waited. I documented. I remembered. Because sometimes survival isn't just about walking again. It's about reclaiming your name. She closed her folder but kept speaking. "This isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. We don't talk enough about what financial abuse looks like when it wears a familiar face. We don't warn each other about the kind of exploitation that uses love as its mask." She glanced out across the room. "I'm standing here today not because I was rescued, but because I remembered who I was and who I still am." A quiet murmur of affirmation swept through the room, soft claps, some tearful eyes. Margaret stepped back from the podium as the crowd rose to their feet, not in thunderous applause but in something weightier, respect, recognition. The MC returned, visibly moved. "Tonight, we're proud to announce the launch of the Margaret Callahan Grant for Elder Protection and Advocacy, a dedicated fund for survivors of elder exploitation, especially those whose stories are still trapped behind someone else's narrative." Margaret didn't speak again. She didn't need to. She returned to her seat beside Diane, hands trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from a weight finally lifted. Back home, she brewed a cup of tea and opened her laptop. She clicked through the now archived Fundraiser page, the same one that once bore her face like a charity mascot. The banner photo had been taken down, the donation button replaced by a gray banner that read, "This campaign has been deactivated due to confirmed misuse." She scrolled to the Team Members tab. Claire's name had vanished, Travis's too, only hers remained. But now it read, "Reported by original organizer, Margaret Callahan." No statement, no plea, just the truth, left standing when everything else had fallen away. She took a sip of tea, clicked the tab closed, and opened a fresh document. At the top, she typed, "For the next woman who's told to stay quiet." Then she leaned back, exhaled, and let the silence be hers again. They staged a miracle. But I was the one who recovered and remembered.